When you want to reuse yarn that's already been knitted, for example, I have a little swatch here that has already been knitted and blocked. This is a superwash wool, and it's already been blocked. And let's say I have an entire sweater that I want to unravel. When you unravel yarn, you're going to end up with yarn ramen, essentially. If you look at it, it looks like some ramen noodles. And it's just going to tangle and twist, and you're not going to be able, or I would not recommend using it straight, like this, and then immediately using it to reknit something else, because it already has all of these kinks in it, right? From when it was previously blocked. So I'm going to take you along with me on a journey. We're going to reuse some yarn that was knitted into a sweater, and the sweater didn't quite work out for me. So we're going to unravel it, and we'll end up with all this yarn ramen. And I'll show you my method of managing this mess by putting it straight from the knitted sweater into using the ball winder, and then from the ball winder to the swift. And that will allow me to put it in the form of a hank. And then I will wash the yarn, hang it to dry, and then put it back on the swift in order to get it back onto the ball winder. And then the yarn will come out just like this, and it won't be yarn ramen any longer, and it'll be suitable to reknit. Let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is to separate this yarn from the knitted piece and get it onto the ball winder. I can usually go a few feet at a time because some yarns just really want to catch and they almost kind of felt into each other. I know this is a superwash wool, but I'm just saying they do sometimes catch on each other, the strands of yarn, as they're knitted, so unraveling them can sometimes be a little tricky. All of this yarn here is actually yarn that I also unraveled. That sweater I was referring to before, it actually is this yarn, and I've just already unraveled it all. But I definitely wanted to show you the process of when it goes from the knitted piece straight onto the ball winder. Okay, it's going a little bit easier now. There we go. That's the stopping point for this ball of yarn, and we'll just remove it. And there's our first ball of yarn. I'll do the rest of the shawl, and then we'll come back and get this ball of yarn onto the swift. So we've got our yarn swift. Unfortunately, my swift, this little wooden knob that I would normally bring this thing up here and lock it, it doesn't work very well, if at all, really. It doesn't do anything. So I just have to use usually a rubber band and these little things from the hardware store. And that's how we'll get around that. The first thing we're going to want to do is find the tail of yarn coming from the center of the ball. And we're just going to loosely tie it onto the edge of the swift, just in one of these locations here. That's just to anchor it, so as we're turning the yarn it has something to anchor it down, and we'll be fine. Then we're going to hold the yarn up in the center area of the swift. This is where the yarn was going to go between the, it opens up like a sideways V, right? So we're going to make sure that the yarn's in the middle. I'm going to put the yarn on the floor just so that there's a little more weight and it might feed a little nicer. So we're just turning the swift, holding it in place so that it just wraps around the middle area of the yarn swift. As you can see, it's creating the very first stages of of a hank of yarn. All right, now we've got all of the yarn from one of the balls of yarn on the Swift. Let's use some waste yarn. Just like they do when you buy a hank of yarn, they tie it off in a few places. So I'm just going to use a little bit of waste yarn and I'm going to tie it right here. Not too tightly, just so that the yarn kind of stays together. And I'm just going to tie it maybe in 2 spots. One once near the yarn end that ended up over there, and once around this yarn tail. So maybe just right here. Okay, so now that we've got the at least 2 areas tied off, we're going to remove the yarn from here. And we're just going to collapse the Swift and take the yarn off. You see this yarn ramen we've got going here? So now we've got 1 hank. I'm going to do the other ball of yarn and we're going to have 2 hanks, and then we will wash the yarn and hang it to dry. Now what we're going to do is wash the yarn, or at least give it a good soaking. You're going to need your yarn ramen. In my case, I've got 2 hanks. I need 2 hangers and a bucket. I've got a bucket. You can use any container, but basically I just need a container that's big enough to fit the yarn. And if you have it and if you want it, some wool wash or some other kind of wool conditioner kind of liquid that if you want to, you can just soak the yarn in that. I can't find mine right now, so I'm just going to use plain water. All right, we've got a bucket, I've got some cold water, and I'm just going to push these under the water until they kind of soak up some water, and we'll just leave them alone. If you hold this pile of yarn down, you'll feel the bubbles escaping because there's air in the yarn. So you really want to just kind of hold it down for a minute or 2 so that the water can really soak into the yarn. And you just want to gently squeeze the water out of this yarn. And you don't want to twist it or wring it or anything like that. You just kind of want to gently squeeze the water out. And then we're just going to hang it up and let it dry. So now I've got the yarn separated into a nice little hank, and I'm going to just kind of drape it over a hanger. And here's kind of what it looks like hanging from the shower curtain rod. It's just separated into a big oval. It's just going to hang like this until it's dried, and it might take a day or so for it to fully dry. So these are now dry, and you can see that by hanging it up to dry, it's straight now. The yarn is straight and it doesn't look like yarn ramen anymore. I'm gonna take this out and move it over to the other room to put it on the Swift. Now we've got a perfectly usable ball of yarn. It's straight yarn, it's not kinked anymore. Looks like it did when I bought it.